Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is the Two Tokens podcast. And today we are here with Olivier Rikken and Clair Wermers of CMS Derks Lawyers. And today's session will be all about the new token roadmap that has been updated by Oliver and the CMS team, Clair team, to reflect the new MiCA regulation. So welcome, Olivier. And for those of you who don't know you, maybe a short introduction. Yeah. Can't imagine they don't know you.
Thank you very much. Claire, you want to go first?
Sure. Yes, my name is Clair Wermers and I'm a partner at CMS in Amsterdam. And I advise on regulatory matters and corporate matters, including everything that has to do with tokenization and digital assets.
Yeah, my name is Olivier Rikken, long-time entrepreneur in the Web3 space, as they call it nowadays. Know quite a lot in depth about tokenization, smart contracts, blockchain, all that stuff. Besides being an entrepreneur, I'm also a board member of Two Tokens, in charge of the research team, which does research towards the token roadmap. So quite logical that I'm here together with Claire.
Yeah, and it should be said, we're going to present it today here at the Provincie Zuid-Holland, which is the local government. And we're going to demonstrate. Pretty soon, the world can see, token roadmap live.
Yeah.
What are the big differences compared to the first version that we put live 2 years ago already, huh?
Yeah. Well, without going into the legal details, I'll leave that to Claire. But obviously, we updated the roadmap with MiCA in mind. And although MiCA isn't active yet, it is better that you start preparing right now of what is coming ahead. And MiCA has a couple of major implications for people who want to do something with tokenization. Not in the least that prior to MiCA, the focus was quite a lot on the issuer of the token in itself. And MiCA in itself goes beyond the issuer of the token, but also to the crypto asset service provider and provides with additional regulation there. So it's been updated on the token issuer side because especially for everything that calls itself utility token nowadays, it can have major implications, but also we'll come down to that in a second. And on the other hand, it has implications for people who provide services around tokens, tokenization, etc. So it goes beyond the issuing in itself.
So MiCA is really a solve it all. It covers everything.
No, I think MiCA definitely will change, I should say, the regulatory landscape. But I think if you look at utility tokens, certain stable coins, it was now possible or is now possible to structure them outside supervision, basically. And also all the related services, so providing advice on crypto assets, certain platforms, they're all not regulated. And after MiCA, they will probably be regulated. There are also some useful exemptions or an authorization is required, or you should publish a white paper. So I think that's the biggest difference, and we incorporated that in the roadmap. But I think it's also good to mention that MiCA will not solve all, because we will also have the existing regulatory framework. So traditional e-money tokens, securities, and I think still a significant part of the tokens that will be issued is a security token. They will be within the scope of the existing and also the future regulatory framework for securities. So I think MiCA is an additional legal framework you should bear in mind when creating a token or providing services with respect to tokens.
Yeah, and speaking of which, whom do you think was markets and crypto assets MiCA made for? Was it made for the crypto coin operators, the exchanges, or was it made for everybody in Europe wants to do something with digital economy?
I think especially they created it as a catch-all regulation. We've also seen that in the past for other new forms of investments, for the utility tokens and certain stable coins, I think, and the platform and the service providers around it. So the finfluencers, the exchanges. I think it is intended to cover those parties.
Yeah, and don't forget, it is actually the upside of MiCA is that it's a European wide legislation or regulation, where prior to that every country could basically come up with something themselves, and now we at least have clarity throughout Europe how to deal with these various utility tokens and the service providers, etc. So it actually gives a common ground within the European legal area, where we can start from, at least from a legal perspective. I'm not sure about a practical perspective, but at least from a legal perspective.
Yes.
Yeah, but today is March 29, 2023, when we record this podcast, and MiCA has still not been accepted in Parliament, right? So
No.
we're still waiting. It's been postponed a couple of times. Do we expect that MiCA will create a level playing field throughout Europe? Because in Germany we have the crypto gazettes, EWBD, we have France with different, that was actually in the news with Circle. How is MiCA going to affect all these different European legislations? Are they all of a sudden wiped out, or is it coming in? That's my big question, and I think for a lot of our listeners.
Well, I think it's now scheduled for the 17th of April. So we will see then after 12 or 18 months, MiCA will come into effect. But I think what we have right now is, at least in the Netherlands, we have the implementation of the anti-money laundering directive. And I think the biggest difference is that MiCA is a regulation. It's actually my car. So then there is no room to deviate for countries. And I think that is really a good thing, because now if you want to offer certain wallet services or exchange services, you have to register in all countries. And there you see the differences. And there you also see that certain countries are putting local legislation in place or to protect their consumers, which make it difficult to access that country, or they facilitate it because they want to attract certain fintech parties. So there you see the differences. So I think for at least the assets that will fall within the scope of MiCA, it will be helpful that you have clarity indeed, what Olivier just mentioned.
That's a very important distinction.
Yeah.
Assets that will fall
Yeah.
within MiCA, because
Yeah.
there's a lot that don't. Huh?
Yes.
There are many that
Yeah.
don't.
And it's also still a bit uncertain what will happen with the local legislation that is in place now. I think the expectation is that MiCA will replace that to a certain extent, at least the registrations where you have all the differences across Europe. But well, we have to see, and also the interpretation, because when it comes to KYC on customers, I think that is colored by the local authorities, and I think that would also be really helpful to have European guidance on that.
And it can actually help your project a lot, right? So, for example, one of the elements that MiCA describes is that in certain situations, or I think almost all situations, but then I have to look at Clair again. For example, you have to have a white paper describing what your token is going to do. And they give quite some good guidelines what needs to be in this white paper. So what is there that you have to describe, at least to provide enough information for your customer, etc. So besides seeing it as a burden, people can also start seeing it as, hey, but it gives you a clear guideline what to do and what not to do. Although there are exemptions where you might challenge that looking at the description of utility tokens right now, they take it very, very strict. Or no, the other way around, very broad actually. So a lot of tokens that you might question should fall under financial regulation might fall under financial regulation under MiCA right when it comes into effect. So that's something we still have to monitor how that is going to go over time.
And what will be workarounds? Because I know in certain countries it's very easy. You could, for instance, ask for a license in Spain, which is an online system, and it's a couple of thousand a year. Then you have a European passport, I understand, with MiCA, and you can operate in all European countries. Is that right?
Well, it's right that there are differences to register right now, but I think after MiCA, you have to follow the same procedure in all countries.
So you still have to register in all countries that you want to operate in?
No, only in your home member state, and then you can file a passport. And I think that works for all the traditional finance documents, and the same approach will be applied for the under MiCA. But I think what I see as a concern is that in the Netherlands, at least, we charge we have a certain amount of supervision costs, and we divide that by the number of parties that is under supervision, which is a fair system. But you also see that in other countries, the fees are significantly lower. And I think if a license or registration provides for a European passport, you can shop around Europe and see, where it's easy to get one,
and
the lowest cost, indeed. And we have seen that with the investment firms, so the brokers for the traditional securities. A lot of those parties obtain the license in the east of Europe or on Malta, and then they just file it with the regulator, and they are active in Europe. So I think as a Corporation Netherlands, if you want to have those companies in the Netherlands, and I think that's a choice, and then maybe you should look at the costs of supervision. And it's uncertain right now, and we will also not know what, for instance, Spain will do. But if you look at it right now, I think the Netherlands is quite expensive when it comes to the crypto registration under AMLD.
I guess that's a political choice, so it'll be interesting to see how that pans out.
Yes.
But not only that, it also goes to, do we want to innovate in the digital economy, and if we want to do this as a European society, and how is each country going to do this? I think in Germany in particular, they have had some very interesting alterations to the law, and you see the example that happened earlier this year with Siemens, doing a corporate bond tokenized. That's something that people can only dream about here in the Netherlands. Is that right?
But it's quite interesting, the corporate bond system in itself. I doubt if that is part of MiCA or just a regular security.
It's a regular security.
So that's what Claire was saying already. MiCA is additional legislation or regulation besides existing ones, and most of the tokens that we're building are security-like tokens or payment-like tokens or like an e-money token or whatever. And MiCA doesn't replace that regulation. It is an addition to it, where they want to get a grasp on the tokens and the services, etc., around those tokens that really looked much like financial instruments, but due to some design things were just not right fitting into the box of a security, etc. And that's why they created this additional regulation in itself. So always bear that in mind.
So Oliver, we've been in this since 2016. A lot of developments, a lot of knowledge, a lot of professionalism. We are the nerds of two tokens.
Even earlier.
Even earlier. But it seems to me that a lot of people have still more questions. With all this new legislation. How are we going to help these people? How are we going to help entrepreneurs who want to know more about this?
Yeah, well, that's one of the main reasons that with two tokens we created this roadmap. And this roadmap is not going to give you all the answers you want to have right up front, but at least if you start a token project, go through the roadmap, answer the questions, and you'll end up in a certain bucket somewhere, which gives you some guidance where you have to look into. And also, by going through these questions, if you cannot answer the question for yourself, you know at least that you have start coming up with answers to those questions for yourself, because if the token roadmap is going to ask you these questions, the regulators most probably are going to ask you these questions as well. So you better be prepared. So it might help you in preparation, but in the end, once you went through this token roadmap, always consult your legal advisor or some other expert still in order to do so, because this is just a helping tool and it's in no way, shape or form legal advice.
Or maybe join the masterclass. Right?
Join a masterclass that can help, but still that still isn't legal advice in itself. But it at least gives you something for yourself to start wondering. All right, what is all the things I have to think about? And if I end up in certain bucket, then this might adhere to me. And we put some hyperlinks in there so you can start reading a bit more about it. So you really get really prepared before you start discussing with the regulator if you think you're going to be regulated, yes or no, because in the end, they decide, I would say, not you.
So Clair, CMS is all over Europe, right? In what country do you as CMS see the most token projects? And what kind of tokens? Are they investment tokens? Or what kind of projects do you see?
We see bonds in Germany. Also some structures, especially by the banks in France. We see all types of tokens in Luxembourg and the UK. Well, it's not EU, but there we see a lot of token projects. And also questions of parties that are active in this world that now want to come to mainland Europe because they want to make use of a European passport. So, we see parties from the US that want to explore Europe. And then they are looking at good countries. And they also select the Netherlands because, they consider the workforce, the IT, the engineering, everything that is available here, the international workforce that is here. They see that as a positive element. So yes, but I think those are the countries where I see the initiatives.
So France, Germany, Luxembourg. UK, and not Switzerland.
Well, we used to see a lot of projects in Switzerland, but that was more because their regulator was willing to give certain opinions. But then they also found out that if you want to become active in Europe, you need to have a European registration, or you should make sure that you are not regulated in Europe. So I think almost all license requirements or white paper requirements, information requirements, I should say, they will be triggered if you are active in the European Union. So if you approach Dutch investors from Switzerland, then you are active in the Netherlands. So you should be regulated in the Netherlands or make use of a European passport after MiCA. And for that, you need to have establishment in Europe for most authorizations. So
and so, how do we compare in Europe to, for instance, the United States, SEC? I know with a lot of offerings, you have to exclude the Americans, right, because of the SEC, or Asia. Are we somewhere in the middle? Are we very strict now with MiCA? What is your opinion?
Well, I know that in America right now, the regulators completely woke up over the last few years and really gone at all the token and cryptocurrency projects at the moment. And also the service providers around it, where for the first years they were quite quiet and it looked like they were easygoing. Now they're in certain areas they're going at it at full force. Right now, Binance is being sued, I think.
Well, there were some irregularities with FTX, so I guess there's all reason for the regulators to come down.
But in this case, FTX was regulated in the Bahamas and not in the US, although you had FTX America, or FTX US. But I think looking at the US right now, I can't speak about Asia. Maybe you can say something about that. But the regulators are really looking at it with scrutinizing detail at the moment, I would say.
And not only the SEC, right? Also.
No, the SEC, the CFTC. So multiple ones. Yeah.
Yes, no, I think the same applies to Asia, but I do not know all the ins and outs. But I think when things happen like FTX, I think then all regulators wake up and see what's happening, and also if consumers get involved. So I think that is the reason for all the activities of the regulators around the world, I think.
Well, today's expert session, you both, are first going to talk to MiCA and Token Roadmap, and then the second agenda point is, of course, that we are going to work on a broad analysis of how we compare to the rest of Europe, level playing field, and how it affects the competitiveness and innovationness of the Netherlands. What bottlenecks do you see besides cost, Claire, and Olivier? What do you think that will come up in this discussion that you are going to moderate, Oliver?
Well, I don't think it's going to be the regulatory part that much, because we have European broad regulation, which applies basically to all the European countries, of course. It's going to be in practical elements, like some countries have central registries that you have to use, others don't, and are more open to decentralized systems, etc. The cost aspect can be one. But also, I think, and that is something that the industry itself still has to look into the mirror in a lot of cases, is that you see still a lot of DeFi projects, etc., going wrong on very basic stuff. Today on Twitter, or yesterday on Twitter, it was announced that SafeMoon, it's one of the projects, was hacked. And looking at it, it was the most basic security that they lacked in their smart contract at that point in time. As long as the industry does this kind of stuff, then the regulators are not going to go easy. And so the industry in itself has to step up in maturity with regards to smart contract auditing, etc. Because everything you develop in a decentralized way, meaning that you develop it on a public blockchain infrastructure, you have to bear in mind a public blockchain infrastructure is the most hostile environment to develop on, because once it's out there, it's transparent and it's really hard to change something in the code base of your smart contract. And it's cool that we have this decentralized system, can start doing peer-to-peer, but if it's, as it is, such a hostile environment where you develop on, it will also mean that you have to have very good safety measures in place for if things go wrong. So on the technical side, there will be hurdles. On the organizational side, maybe, because that's one of the things we see right now as well. New organizational structures that might need new legal structures for these organizations as well, although I'm still hesitant, because in most of the times, existing legal structures can pretty much deal with the new organizational structures. And the rest, that's something that will have to come up in the coming 3 months, because I don't know either. It's, let's see.
It's going to be interesting, huh?
No, and I think as a practical point, I think it would be really helpful if it would become more easy to get a bank account. It's pretty, it's almost a silly thing to mention, but it's a real hurdle, because you need a bank account to be active. And I know that's not only a Dutch problem. All European banks and applicants for a bank account struggle with that. But I think that would be good to have some guidance on that, or that the banks have guidance on that.
Is it equally difficult in all European countries, or do you see differences?
Well, I'm not sure if I know all the ins and outs, but what I hear from my colleagues in Europe, it's difficult in most European countries, yes. Mm. Yes.
Yeah, that's a real hurdle, huh? Yeah. Especially companies that have been around for 30 years, all of a sudden get their bank account revoked because...
Yes.
Yeah. That is something that we need to solve.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's like you said, Claire, it's probably in a lot of these practical things, like a bank account, like the costs are too high, like the you need to make use of a central registry that doesn't technically connect to your registry. So what do you do then? These kind of practical things you're probably going to run into. And that's, like I said, that's something to explore in the coming months.
Well, what I find interesting is that when I'm in certain industries, for instance, energy, or agri-tech or whatever, and we talk about tokenization, people don't understand. They look at you like water is burning, right? Because it's still very technical to them. It's very abstract. But at the same time, everything in a digital economy is driven by a token in the end, right? So how do we, change that narrative? That we not only cater to ourselves about all the token taxonomies, the legal, regulatory, and how do we cater to the people who are not interested in tokens, but just want to know the end user value? If you talk to somebody who says, "Yeah, I could buy an NFT and it gets me into the theater," he has no idea that NFT is just non-fungible token that just got used in the wrong way. How do we, as the industry here, change that narrative?
You're actually giving the answer yourself. You're saying, I have this NFT. Don't even mention the abbreviation NFT, because people don't care. They say, I have this ticket and I can trade it with somebody else very easy without raising the price much, etc. And I can trust that if I show this and hand it over to somebody else, it cannot be copy-pasted, etc. These kind of very basic things coming down to customer value. That's what we have to talk about. The customer value and the customer journey, the UI, the UX in technical terms. So the user interface, the user experience in itself. That's what we have to talk about, not about the technical sector, setup in the background, etc. This is really where we have to refrain from, which is always hard because it's a new industry and we're innovative and coming up with a lot of new terms, but still a lot of people don't understand how they have to buy a token and sell a token, that they actually have to have cryptocurrencies in order to transfer it to somebody else, which makes it hard, very, very difficult. So we have to overcome these, what we in industry think are very logical steps, and everybody knows them, right? We have to switch this mindset saying, no, everybody knows nothing, and they want to have it as easy as possible with customer and value attached to it somehow. And that's what we have to start talking about. That's
keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of which, NFTs, MiCA, covered?
Probably not.
Oh, really?
No, it depends on how they are structured. So that is also
and what they are being used
yes,
for. Because in the
yeah.
end, an NFT is a technical standard, not a functional standard.
We here know that,
Yeah.
but in general talking, people talk about NFTs. They think it's
yes, but
right?
it's I think it depends on what you can do with the token. So it's difficult to put NFTs in one basket. So you should really look at the rights and obligation of the token holder. Yes, maybe that's a lawyer answer, but
it all depends on the
really
purpose of the token.
Yes.
And if you build it using a normal token or an ERC20, if you use Ethereum terms, or a non-fungible token, the ERC 721 or the 1155, whatever.
Yes.
That's just a technical standard. But if the functionality is exactly the same, then you will probably be regulated in exactly the same way. Because in the end, regulation is not about the technical standard, it's about the functionality.
Yeah.
There's also this afternoon, one of our guests will be professor from the University of Groningen, and he pointed out that, I don't know the English term, but maybe you do, goederenrecht. There's still a lot that needs to be done in the law. You have any opinion on that? Did we look into that? I remember we did the electronic bill of lading.
No, I think that what you now sometimes see is that a token mirrors a traditional security or a traditional instrument. So I think then it's always the question, what are the rights and obligations attached to the token? And what if it goes wrong? Do I rely on another instrument that mirrors it in the traditional world, or is it a true native token? So I think that is really interesting and should be explored in more detail, because if there are trouble, I think this is extremely relevant. And also because you have all the national legislation. But maybe he can share his thoughts on that. But I think you should have an international framework in place. Because now for transfers of contracts, for instance, we have Dutch laws, Dutch rules.
The very first use case that we did was the electronic bill of lading.
Yes.
And we had to change the law. And I was told by the Port of Rotterdam that every country have their own laws.
Yes, they have, and if, for instance, for the transfer of a contract, or that was indeed a bill of lading, there are national rules. So if you want to make a standard or a token that can be used outside the Netherlands, then they should accept the transfer mechanism of the laws of the Netherlands. And if you want a more international standard, you should see how it fits into the local legislation. So I think that's a really interesting subject. But
I see work here because
yes.
I see the token roadmap needs more updates.
Yes.
I think it's a never-ending journey, these kind of roadmaps, because right now it is our first interpretation of a legislation that is officially still not approved, because it still has to go through European Parliament, right? But it's our first interpretation. Maybe things are going to be changed. We need to update it. And then when regulation is in place, you get lawsuits, which gives you jurisprudency, so
case law,
case law, these kind of things, and you might need to update it based on that one. And like we mentioned earlier in this podcast, it will very well be that certain utility tokens that, strictly speaking, are now seen as regulated utility tokens, let me call it like that, under MiCA, will not be regulated utility tokens after all, because they're not under financial regulation, yes or no, but that's up to the ESMA.
What does that mean? I have a company, 100 people, I've been doing it for 7 years, I'm growing, I'm having revenue, I have an infrastructure service, utility token. Now MiCA comes. All of a sudden I have to pay the fees to the regulator because I...
Could very well be.
But that would be awful not. If I were that company.
It depends.
Yes.
If
Would he... Maybe he can get an exemption.
Maybe they can get an exemption, but do bear in mind it's European legislation, so that means that you have to go through the ESMA, right, in order to get your exemption.
You will not get. No, I think you should. If you want to make use of an exemption, it should be in MiCA already. I think because of the harmonization in Europe, it will be difficult to have a special position only for one company, only in the Netherlands. But I think what you should do is really look at the definitions and your business and see if you really fit into that definition. I think maybe that could be an approach. And getting authorization can also be a good thing because you can explore in Europe. So that's the other side.
Unless you were already all over Europe.
Yes.
And all of a sudden you get a very high cost for regulatory.
And we have to see what the cost will be. So that has also not been set. But no, but I think that is with all regulations that come into force. There will be parties that will be covered by the regulations that were not covered before. So, yes, that could be.
See, this is the type of information that we share in the masterclass, right? So, and we're kicking off the masterclass next week. Yep. You are doing the first one. You're the first master. Actually. First two, yes. We're hosting it in Amsterdam at CMS's offices. Our first class is, I think, 25. So, but if you're interested, you can still sign up. But we talk about token taxonomy, we talk about legal regulatory, but in all those afternoons, there are 6 afternoons of 4 or 5 hours. The one thing that is always there are use cases, practical use cases with real companies, with real tokens, out there. And so this is something that I really look forward to because it becomes so stuffy and so theoretical, right? If we can apply it to real companies, to real business cases, it resonates better with the companies and institutions out there. And with that, I would like to thank you for doing this podcast. And I hope to see you again soon in the next update for the token roadmap to reflect all the other regulatory changes that are coming. And I wish you best of luck for this expert session that starts in the next hour. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That was it for today's podcast. Thank you for listening in and please subscribe so you don't miss out on our upcoming episodes. If you want to get in touch with us, you can find our contact details at www.twotokens.org.